The Galactic Security Academy's auditorium hummed with nervous energy as 200 of the finest cadets from across 17 species settled into their seats. This was it, the final examination that would determine who among them would join the elite ranks of the Threat Assessment Division. Philip, a towering Kryn with crystalline skin that refracted the ambient light into dancing rainbows, adjusted his neural interface and reviewed the parameters one last time. His species had dominated this field for 3 centuries. Their enhanced optical processors, capable of detecting micro-expressions and threat indicators invisible to most organic life. He was confident. He had never failed a simulation. The examination room's lights dimmed, and Proctor Vexenar's gravelly voice filled the space. "Cadets, your final test begins now. Before you sits a randomly assembled group of sentients. Your task: identify the greatest threat in this room. You have 1 standard hour." The transparent wall before them flickered to life, revealing what appeared to be a waiting area, perhaps a spaceport terminal. 37 beings of various species occupied the space, engaged in typical pre-transit activities. Some read datapads, others conversed quietly. A few slept. Philip's optical processors immediately began their analysis, scanning for the obvious markers: concealed weapons, suspicious behavior patterns, anomalous biological readings. His gaze swept past a Dravaxian merchant whose scales rippled with barely contained aggression, past a hulking gourmand whose muscles tensed with predatory readiness. Around the auditorium, cadets furiously recorded their observations. The Zenthari twins in the front row had already tagged the gourmand as their primary target. The celebrated Morphidian analyst, 3 seats from Philip, had locked onto a nervous Quellan whose tentacles writhed with what appeared to be anxiety. Philip's attention settled on a warrior positioned near the exit. Perfect tactical positioning, military bearing, hands hovering near concealed equipment. Yes, this was clearly the threat. He began compiling his report, confident in his analysis, but something nagged at him. A discordant note in the symphony of threat indicators his processors were feeding him. His gaze drifted, unbidden, to row 3 of the waiting area. There sat a human female, unremarkable by most standards. Flora, according to the biodata streaming across his interface. Brown hair, pulled back, simply, plain clothing. She held a worn bookcan, actual physical book, of all archaic things, appeared wholly absorbed in its contents. Her vital signs were calm, her body language relaxed. By every measurable metric, she registered as the least threatening individual in the entire room. Philip's processors flagged her as a non-threat and moved on. He returned his focus to the Vrex warrior, crafting what he was certain would be a masterful threat analysis. The hour passed. One by one, cadets submitted their assessments. The results displayed on the master board told a familiar story. 63% had identified the gourmand, 21% the Vrex warrior, 12% the Dravaxian merchant. The remaining 4% were scattered among various other high-profile targets. Not a single cadet had selected the human in row 3. Proctor Vexenar's expression was unreadable as he activated the analysis protocol. Let us review. The scene rewound, then played forward in enhanced detail. The gourmand's muscles weren't tensed for attack. They showed the strain of chronic pain from an old injury. The Devaxian's scale rippling was a side effect of indigestion medication. The nervous Quellin was simply terrified of flying. The Vrex warrior's tactical positioning was because that seat had the best view of the departure boards. Shall we examine your consensus non-threat? Vexenar's voice carried a hint of dark amusement. The image zoomed to Flora, still reading peacefully in row 3. The analysis protocols dug deeper, past the surface calm, past the obvious biometrics. They revealed what the Academy's most advanced equipment had detected, but what 200 trained cadets had missed. Flora's heart rate was calm because humans had developed remarkable cardiovascular control during their species' violent evolution. Her relaxed posture masked a physical capability. Assessment rated in the 98th percentile for her species, and humans, the analysis noted, had emerged from a death world with gravity 20% above galactic standard. The book wasn't a book. Enhanced imaging revealed it as a scanning device capable of mapping every lifeform in the terminal, cataloging weaknesses, calculating optimal neutralization sequences. While appearing to read, Flora had identified and developed countermeasures for every potential threat in the room, including the trained security personnel watching from concealed positions. The chemical analysis was damning. Flora's seemingly ordinary clothing was saturated with compounds that didn't exist on any registered database. Her skin carried traces of substances that could be weaponized with nothing more than a strategic touch. The beverage container beside her, its contents would test as a Class 7 corrosive if properly activated. But it was the psychological profile that made even the battle-hardened Proctor pause before sharing it. Flora's brain patterns showed the characteristic markers of what humans called hypervigilance, a state of constant, exhaustive awareness evolved from countless generations spent as both predator and prey on their brutal homeworld. While appearing to read, she was simultaneously tracking every movement, calculating every threat, running endless combat scenarios through her mind. She wasn't sitting quietly in row 3, reading a book. She was a hunter, perfectly camouflaged among prey, deciding whether or not to strike. The human species, Vexenar explained to the stunned auditorium, evolved as persistence predators on a world that actively tried to kill them. They developed the ability to suppress their threat indicators because their predators evolved to detect such signals. A human at rest is not peaceful. They are compressed potential, coiled springs, loaded weapons with the safety engaged. Philip felt his crystalline structure dim with the realization of his failure. All his advanced sensors, all his sophisticated analysis useless. He had looked for obvious threats and missed the apex predator sitting in plain sight. The greatest threats, Vexenar continued, rarely announce themselves. They don't need to. Humanity didn't claw their way to spacefaring status by being obvious. They did it by being underestimated over and over and over again. This is why the Threat Assessment Division exists. This is why you failed today. The proctor's gaze swept across the silent cadets. You may retake this examination next cycle. I suggest you study harder. Specifically, I suggest you study what humans call the quiet ones. They're the ones who have already calculated 17 ways to kill you before you finished saying hello on the screen. Flora turned a page, her expression serene. Her danger, absolute. Philip looked at the peaceful human in row 3 and finally understood. The greatest threat wasn't the one who looked dangerous. It was the one who didn't need to.